going to have an interesting intellectual insight into local government, and specifically the work of Tracy Pernegger and Li Pernegger. Tracy is based with PARI and Li is based with us here in GTAC. Both have done their PhDs. So I should say Dr. Tracy Pernegger and Dr. Li Pernegger. Welcome to them as well. Today we're going to be talking about the capacity building systems for local government. And I think, anybody that has read a newspaper in the past month will know that there's concerns with local government, of course, major concerns. And they have done a diagnostic review. Bikile, I see you not on mute. Can I ask you to mute, please? I'll mute you. And they've done these very interesting body of diagnostic reviews that they've done, where they are talking about what is going wrong in local government capacity building. But let me introduce them a little bit before we talk more about the topic. Tracy has done her PhD in anthropology, and if I'm not mistaken, Tracy, it was around food security and issues around that. And she's developed a deep interest in understanding institutional failure in the public sector, which means that she will have a job for, the foreseeable future. And that she believes sort of departs from a position that understanding the failure is a better grasp of how to fix it than to come with best practices. And I think that's it's a necessary intervention in our way of thinking around how do we deal with the failures. So she's done a body of work already on local government quite extensively. She works with the Public Affairs Research Institute that's affiliated to Wits University. And she's really focused on the local government aspect. She's looked at aspects around poor audit outcomes, Section 139 interventions, and present a new theoretical framework. Dr. Li Pernegger is with GTAC. She's our local government specialist. She's had about 30 years plus of hands-on experience in working with the built environment, the program management around the built environment in big cities. She's dealt with that big grant on that 10 billion rand grant for township development. She's worked with 57 municipalities by now, and she's really also worked quite extensively in Johannesburg, especially looking at the economically depressed areas that need to be regenerated. So sort of a very practical understanding of the local government space. And today they're going to guide us on their view of what's gone wrong with the capacity building system for local government. I think it's quite interesting. They're presenting a new concept of capability development. And the question we're going to be asking them at the start of this presentation is, so what's new? So what are you telling us that is different and new from what has been happening? And I hope they're going to give us great answers on that. Tracy and Li, it's over to you. You're ready to present. I believe Tracy is having a bit of a load shedding problem, but Li, are you ready to present then? Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. So Tracy, I'll put the presentation up. I'm having a city power moment, actually, but for a city power 2 days. Can everybody see that? Let me just put it on
but maybe you want to put it on slide mode.
Yeah,
just put it on slide mode.
Okay, great. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is the presentation of a fairly very comprehensive and voluminous report, which is going to be published by GTAC and National Treasury at the beginning of May. So what we presented here really is just an overview of the aims of the research and the main findings. The first point to make is that this diagnostic review was conceptualized as part of a much broader research program. So it represents the first step in a multi-year program, which has been undertaken by the Intergovernmental Relations part of National Treasury to have a look at the fragmented capacity building system across government. And the long-term goals there are not just to achieve better value for money of all across the government, but also to try and improve the outcomes of the system. Because the starting point for this work was the understanding that even though a considerable amount of money is being spent, and the initial assessment was that some 2.5 billion rand a year was being spent in the system, we're not really seeing the commensurate improvements in the performance of local government. So what this diagnostic review did, the work started in December of 2020 and continued until around July of last year. And we worked with, I think it's interesting to point out at this point, we worked with a very comprehensive steering committee. Sometimes in this kind of research, you do your findings and then you go and present them to stakeholders at the end. We worked with a very wide range of stakeholders right from the beginning, from a wide range of national departments, provincial departments, and other stakeholders like SALGA and the DBSA. And I think that wasn't always an easy process, but it was a very useful one because it meant that all of the stakeholders were being taken along on the research journey as it unfolded, rather than just sort of being presented something at the end. Our very first point that we made in the research, which was really the first sort of main finding that was presented to that steering committee based on our initial literature review, was about distinguishing between capacity and capability. So the language across most of local government and the language that is in most of the legislation is capacity building, whereas the National Development Plan talks about capability in terms of the language of a capable state. And the first point that we wanted to make was that this concept of capacity building was really insufficient for what it is that all of these programs are actually trying to achieve, and that it was more appropriate to talk about capability development. And sometimes people use the terms interchangeably, but they actually mean quite different things. In that, capacity is the potential under ideal circumstances, while capability refers to what is possible under actual circumstances. And that's an important distinction because the actual circumstances in a local municipality are usually very far from ideal. If we have a look at what is happening in the municipality, resources that are available to them, the political context in which they're operating, and so on. So capacity is often taken to mean really the skills of individuals, or sometimes taken to include the system of processes and technology in a municipality, whereas capability incorporates everything that impacts the ability of a municipality to get things done. It's not just individual skills, it's all the financial resources in a municipality, the business systems, political stability, staff morale is very important, staff turnover, community participation, and a whole range of other contextual issues. And what happens at the moment is the way in which we talk about capacity building, people tend to externalize these issues as if to say, well, we're doing capacity building, but all these other things influence what happens, and there's nothing we can do about them. We're saying all of these things together impact what goes on, and we can't really change things with just fixing one of them. So what we found in the research is that a lot of programs do succeed in improving a person's capacity. So a chief financial officer will go on a series of training and workshops, and there's no doubt that that person's skills and their theoretical ability to do their job has improved. But when they get back into their municipality, they are actually only able to make the most marginal of improvements, or hardly any improvements, because of all of these other factors that constrain what is possible. So if our end goal is to actually improve the outputs and the outcomes achieved by local government, we have to look at capability and not just at capacity. So, as I said, the review was in response to 25 years of effort to build local government capacity, and lots of organizations and lots of money and lots of different people involved in this effort, but really very little to show for it in terms of local government's ability to deliver its constitutional mandate. And I think all of these things, the current state of local government, are well known to the people in this webinar. The number of municipalities in financial distress has increased significantly over the last 10 years. 75% of households say that their basic service delivery needs are not being met by their municipalities. There's rising levels of dissatisfaction with those service delivery needs. And what we can say is that what exists is a capability gap, using our language of capability, is that the capability gap is the difference between the ability to get things done and the municipality's actual ability to get things done. And as that capability gap widens, as the municipality's ability to get things done kind of moves further and further away from what it needs to get those things done, then we see this increase in the capability gap. And as the demands on local government has increased, as we have more and more households that need services from municipalities, so we've seen that this capability gap is increasing. Just briefly on the legislative and regulatory context within which this capability development takes place. The Constitution and supporting legislation talks about the responsibility of national and provincial government to support local government and to build local government capacity. This is the basis on which all of these programs have been structured. But an important point which might seem evident, but we found is often forgotten, is that this capacity is a means to an end and not an end in itself. So the goal of this legislation was not to do capacity building in municipalities. It was to improve the ability of local government to deliver its constitutional mandate via the means of capacity building. And this is, excuse me, very, very important to remember that we're doing capacity building for a specific purpose, and that is to improve what happens in local government. And the failure of most of the initiatives to achieve that to date suggests that those two have actually become disconnected from each other, that we've started to see the means as the end in itself. The second important point was that all of this was supposed to be delivered in a cooperative environment, and there's two components to that. First of all, it wasn't something that one party kind of unilaterally does to someone else, that there wasn't one party who would come in and do capability development to another party, but also from the other side, that local government would in fact be a committed and have the right sort of spirit of cooperation in terms of these kinds of initiatives. So it was envisaged as something that sort of equals were doing together, both committed to the end goal. What were some of the key themes from the literature that we had a look at, was both international and local? Well, the first thing was that significant numbers of these kinds of programs all around the world, and not just in the developing world, fail to meet their goals, which is about improving service delivery or outcomes and outputs. And the general sort of consensus of why this happened was because of poor problem diagnosis. And if you'd misunderstood what the underlying problem was, it was very likely that you were going to design a program that didn't really address the underlying problems. The second point was that what we're talking about in this kind of public sector reform is fundamentally changing the way in which things are done. We want to fundamentally change the way in which water is delivered in a municipality. We want to fundamentally change the way in which other kinds of services are delivered. And that's actually really hard to do, especially if you think, the local government structure in South Africa is relatively new, but we're still talking about more than 20 years of people doing things in a certain way and organizations operating in a certain way. And it's really, really hard to change that. It's much easier to have new legislation and new compliance rules and create new institutions or send people to workshops. And so there's this overwhelming tendency for people to focus on what is actually easier to do. A lot of the programs tend to present their activities, i.e. sending people on workshops or training, as impact, and losing sight of the long-term goals, which is actually to improve the outcomes of the organization. A very interesting point from the literature was that context and inclusion matter, that the more successful programs were those that focused on developing solutions that were based on local realities rather than simply importing some best practice from a completely different country or a completely different place and trying to impose it. And that also the likelihood of success was increased the more that there was buy-in from all of the parties that were involved in it. So kind of the worst sort of program you can get is have sort of an unwilling or disinterested or surly partner and try and impose some so-called best practice that you just cut and paste from some other country. Those are almost designed to fail. The other point was that long-term and sustainable improvements take time. It really, really takes a long time to restructure an organization, to refocus it, and to get sustainable improvements in what happens. And then the final point was that a lot of the organizations around the world that are involved in doing these kind of initiatives themselves lack the kind of capabilities that you need in order to do this work well. But there's actually very little focus on building appropriate and capable delivery organizations. So that was what the literature told us. When we went and had a look at the system, our very first task to do in this diagnostic review was to try and work out how much money was actually being spent in the system. Remember, the Treasury started off with a rough estimate of 2.5 billion rand a year. How much money was being spent and who was spending it on what? This proved to be a fairly complex issue. There is absolutely no standardized way of reporting this across any of the departments. Provincial COGTAs and provincial treasuries all report differently. National departments all report differently. All the conditional grants report differently. But after going through a lot of work and doing a detailed breakdown over the last 5 years of all the major entities that were involved, what we could work out was that in the 2019-2020 year, which was the last year for which we had data at the time of the research, just over 9 billion rand was being spent on local government capacity building initiatives. And to put that in context, that is 13% of the aggregate capital expenditure by all of local government. So it's a not inconsiderable amount of money that is being spent. This amount of money is also most likely an underestimate because it excluded very small initiatives. So capacity building is something that almost everyone is doing, from every mayor's office down to every premier's office, down to all sorts of departments. Everybody's got a tiny little program doing capacity building, and it's very difficult to work out where that is. It's not clearly reported, and it's often invisible. It also excludes the costs of the administration of the conditional grants and much of the non-state owned capacity building endeavors, of which there are a number. We also found that there were very significant variations across provincial treasuries and COGTAs on how much money they were spending, which didn't seem to bear much correlation with the actual state of municipalities in that province or their trend over time. So there wasn't a strong relation between how much money was being spent and the sort of outcomes that were being achieved or that were not being achieved. There was a lot of duplication and fragmentation. And that's got a lot to do with the fact that while a local municipality is a very integrated organization where lots of things happen together at the same time, the line departments and the provincial departments that are responsible for delivering these capacity building services are very much mandate based. So what would happen then is that there is some either duplication. A good example of that was in the area of financial management, where both National COGTA and National Treasury and the provincial treasuries and the provincial COGTAs were all doing something in financial management. SALGA was doing something, the LG CETA was doing something. So there's a lot of duplication there, but also fragmentation. So what you'd find, particularly in the provincial COGTAs, which are the single biggest component of this expenditure, is that a provincial COGTA will have, let's say, 30 different capacity building programs, all dealing with different issues, from financial management to public participation to infrastructure planning, and then is delivering that across 23 municipalities. So what you find is that there are a lot of most of the organizations are doing a great deal of really superficial stuff in a lot of different places, and that is because of the requirement of having as much coverage as possible. This is a picture that that Lee drew, because I'm a PowerPoint idiot, and this sort of gives you an idea of where the money is being allocated. And once again, it was not easy to work this out because of the huge differences in how people report, to the extent that even the national departments couldn't really tell you exactly what the different provincial departments are spending their money on, because there is absolutely no standardized way of reporting it. But really it appeared that the biggest part of it was on local governance, that's adherence to policy, planning, economic planning, land use management planning, local planning was a big part, and public participation. In some provinces, public participation, that is working with municipalities to improve customer service or IDP processes or other kinds of processes. In some provinces, those are the single biggest component of capacity building. Then followed by financial management, and then a lot of things. There's a huge range of things that people are doing. There certainly seems to have been a proliferation of programs, and that reflects, you know, a kind of proliferation of policies and responsibilities of local government. Then infrastructure development, infrastructure support, urban development, and then administration. So really the biggest part, as we said, there was the provincial cogtors, and then the national treasury. A quarter of that expenditure takes place from local municipalities themselves. That was the most difficult one to work out, because none of them really report on that, but that is the own capacity building. There's all the training programs and workshops that the municipalities do themselves. So based on the research and what we did after we'd done the desktop review of having a look at all the programs, we interviewed a lot of people. We interviewed, I think it was 65 people from about 30 different organizations. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to get an insider view of the system, both from the supplier organizations and from the municipalities, about their own view of what was going on in the system. And the first important point to make was that most of the people that we spoke to thought that the system needed significant overhauling. Most of the people, and that includes in all the departments that are delivering these services, really understood that there were serious problems in the system, that they were all working very hard, but they understood that they were having limited impact. And a lot of the time they felt that, you know, sort of really powerless to change the outcomes of the system. So what are the main factors that are impacting the system? Well, the first thing is that it's quite clear that by far 90% of what goes on in the system is a focus on individual capacity rather than organizational capability. So the vast majority of work in the system is about training individuals, sending them on workshops and similar activities rather than organizational capability. There is very, very little work about trying to understand the structural impediments to what goes wrong in a municipality. Very little work on things like business processes, documenting these, changing organizational design, and all of those other things that contribute to organizational capability. There's a strong focus on short-term fixes of symptoms rather than long-term change. And people in the organization said, that's not our choice. We understand in this provincial cogta, we understand that it takes a long time to fix a broken municipality, but all the pressure from above is to show short-term fixes of symptoms. And they said the audit outcome, for example, is a really good one. So there's this huge sort of focus on audit outcomes, and you need to improve the audit outcome this year. So there's never the opportunity, if you've got a fairly inexperienced team in a municipality and they need a couple of years to bed down and learn the system, there's no way that people are going to, you know, accept a poor audit outcome in the interim. So there's pressure to just get consultants in to do the work. There's very limited impact reporting by any of the programs. So the vast majority of the programs on the conditional grants, they report mostly on how much money they spent and then a little bit on kind of how many people were trained. Most of the programs report on things like how many people went to workshops, and how many people went on specified training. And basically none of them report on what was the impact on what was happening in the municipality of these programs. One notable exception, which was quite entertaining, was in one province. They had their activity was to train councillors on how to pass better bylaws. And then at the end of the year, they reported that because the councillors had spent so much time in training, they couldn't go to any council meetings to pass any bylaws. So I think they inadvertently reported on the impact of their program. A lot of program design, people said, often reflect pressure to comply. So there's a lot of focus and resources dedicated to getting people to kind of tick compliance boxes, to make sure that this kind of policy is in place, to make sure that these kinds of documents are submitted, or shifting political priorities. People say, yeah, well, you know, the MEC says that the priority is now, so everybody in the municipality has got to go and do a training course on that, rather than long-term programs that are focused on putting the municipality in a better position to be able to deliver its mandate. We talked about the idea that programs are fragmented. I mean, to an almost ludicrous extent. I mean, some people were saying, yeah, we're all fighting over how to get municipal officials to come on our course, because this is how the whole program is structured. So your KPIs depend on how many people you can get to go on a course. So, you know, they say in some municipalities, people are just going around sort of trying to get people to come on their course. In some municipalities, that's all people do is go on different courses. There's a great deal of municipal monitoring and reporting that is done, a huge pile of information submitted by each municipality all the time, especially to the provinces. But the general consensus is that this hasn't really turned into detailed problem diagnosis. And there was a strong sense that in a lot of places, we don't really understand the root cause of why things are not working. We're just trying to tick the compliance boxes, and we're just trying to get some kind of short-term fixes rather than fixing the underlying problem. It was quite clear that it is difficult to get significant and sustainable change in the way in which people do their work, which is essentially what is required in a lot of cases. And this is not necessarily, you know, obstructionist by people or motivated by bad motivations, but really because it's difficult for people to change. People are worried they're going to lose their jobs if they don't know how to do different things. Very seldom people take the time and effort to explain to administrative staff why they need to do things differently, how what they do links into the bigger picture. So it's really difficult to do that. Our conclusion, our finding number 8 was quite contentious. There were some line departments and some people we interviewed that expressed this view quite strongly, but there was also people who believed that this is not the case. And this was this idea that some municipalities are never going to get to the required capability to be able to deliver every aspect of their constitutional mandate perfectly. And there, the main constraint on that capability that was raised was the issue of resources. In municipalities with very, very high numbers of poor households who just cannot collect the kind of revenue that they need to keep the municipality going. It was quite clear that mutual cooperation across the system is limited. And that's not just between provincial departments and national departments, or provincial departments that represent different line departments, but even within departments or with other entities. So a couple of people said, it's really difficult to get Eskom involved. And one person said that she spends more time trying to get, everybody in her own department to kind of cooperate on an initiative and on these programs than trying to get sort of other national departments to involve. So there's a very, very limited mutual cooperation. And this really undermines the impact of a lot of programs because of the joined up nature of a local municipality. So if you're from the Department of Water and Sanitation and you go into a municipality and you're trying to fix water and sanitation, often the problem is related to procurement, but you don't have any authority over procurement and you can't get the people who are sort of responsible for procurement to work with you. The context of the intervention, rather counterintuitively, a lot of people said under the current system, the more dysfunctional the municipality is, the less likely it is to benefit from the current focus on training programs and building individual capacity. The better the municipality is doing, the higher functioning the municipality, the more likely it is to benefit from these programs. So we seem to have a built-in bias against dysfunctional municipalities in the way in which these things are currently constituted. Long-term programs that focus on entrenching the basics appear to have better results, but these are very resource intensive and so are limited. Collaborative approaches, especially those that incorporate change management, bring everybody along on the journey, tend to show better results, as are programs with clear outcome targets. And when we did the interviews with local government, this was reflected in their own concerns, and they were often frustrated and dismayed, even well-performing municipalities, as being seen as incompetent, kind of having capacity building done to them. What are the implications of the findings? Well, the first thing is that radical change to the system. A lot of people that we interviewed use this term radical change. We can't continue to do what we're doing. The current system is no longer fit for purpose. Of course, it's much easier to talk of radical change than to actually achieve it. There's considerable path dependency in the system. It's just one example. A significant percentage of the people that work in these departments delivering capacity building have their own skills, are very much about training and delivering workshops, which is just one way to in which that is entrenched. And then they also, they're also stuck in their own way of doing things by long-term planning and budgets and targets. So even though everybody's clear that something has to change, it's not quite clear what that something might be. So what we proposed is a new capability development problem-led framework. And this framework, replacing the current system of capacity building with this new framework, would be the long-term goal of all the participants. But realistically, it's not something that can be achieved in the short term. And we shouldn't be aiming to disrupt the system to the extent that this will be required. So this new framework has got 4 guiding principles, and these are a package deal. You can't cut and paste the ones that you want while leaving something else out. They all need to go together. So the first part is this focus on capability development, which we've talked about. The second one is a problem-led approach, and that is starting with the problem that requires solving rather than the capacity of the individual or an apparent solution. So what's an example? Going back to water, when a municipality is not delivering water to a certain standard, a problem-led approach would go in and do a detailed diagnosis to try and understand exactly what is happening that the kind of water service that local residents would like to have is not being delivered. Whereas at the moment, the assumption really is that it's to do with the shortage of skills. We need another engineer, we need this. It really is an agnostic to the solution approach by going in and understanding exactly what the problem is. The second, the third component is co-production and inclusion. And co-production is much stronger than cooperation. It means that all of the parties work together from the start, and that includes the local community or residents, and that everybody works together at all points in the system to agree on what the problem is, to agree on a solution, and then to oversee the implementation. And the last part is a whole municipality approach, that we stop with the system where, one department is responsible for kind of the functional water part, another department is responsible for the procurement that goes into water, another department is responsible for the financial position of the municipality that is required to fund the procurement that goes into the water parts, but that we actually design delivery institutions that can take a fully integrated approach. So that's just really a brief look at the different phases. I'm going to hand over to Lee now. I think I'm probably overstaying my welcome. Lee?
Hi. All right. So one of the things that's included in the diagnostic review is what a framework might look like in terms of a theory of change. And obviously, bearing in mind this is a Treasury report, it's not necessarily a Treasury mandate to develop such a framework. This was really something that we thought that the stakeholders would buy into, and they did, to try and reorient the thinking within the system by all of the participants in that system to a different kind of a direction for the work that they were doing. And so you can see there are some typical examples of inputs, activities, outputs. I think everyone has seen diagrams like this. But just to point out that where we're sitting at the moment in the system is generally on the left-hand side, with inputs being seen as actual outcomes. Sorry, Tracy, can you just put the presentation back? Thank you. So the idea is to realize meaningful and sustainable change in the ability of local government to deliver its mandate in respect of impact. On the right-hand side of the diagram, we really need to focus not just as an all-of-municipality approach, but as an all-of-government approach on new kinds of activities for better outputs and thus outcomes. And so Tracy did mention that we haven't got there's no kind of best practice blueprint anywhere that we can just adopt. I mean, the whole idea is to have a problem-led approach. So the framework that she's advocating in the diagnostic review really has to be built from the ground up. And this is part of the challenge that we're encountering now, I think, within the National Treasury, to specifically and intentionally design the way that the Treasury works to address particular problems in a particular environment. And if it's not a homegrown solution, it clearly is not going to work. So the attributes of the institutional arrangements here specifically need and call for integration across the three spheres of government, but also inter and intra-departments, focusing on problem solving and not necessarily just on the mandate delivery aspects. So the idea is that a new approach then accommodates a decentralized decision-making and differentiated responses. So the document then calls for a two-pronged strategy to be implemented simultaneously. So the first part is steady but incremental improvements to the current system. And that would target, say, for example, improving the expenditure reporting across the system, improving destination reporting. This is very much a Treasury perspective, of course, because it's a Treasury document, but there's many more things that could be considered as well. More targeted collection from the municipalities around the data that is required to understand what kind of capability development one would like to put together. Then streamlining existing grants and programs, as you can imagine, that's very controversial, and also to increase opportunities for learning. And then picking up on that learning aspect, the second prong is to look at a small number of pilot sites for innovation and experimentation. That would be to try and get buy-in for different kinds of approaches, and then also to try different kinds of problem-solving processes. And one of the ideas that was mentioned is a set of perhaps public sector innovation labs, which would allow for this kind of experimentation to happen in different parts of government. And then, so coming to the end, at the moment, where are we? Right, so we have some actions that National Treasury has followed up on. So the review itself was adopted by National Treasury's ExCo in December. And it does contain some suggested next steps for the Treasury, which include advocacy for this capability development orientation, trying to improve the data, identifying and implementing learning opportunities and innovation labs. The document itself was reviewed, was finalized with some small amendments only in February, and it has been released with a formal launch planned for May, which Tracy mentioned right at the beginning. So you're seeing something that a lot of other people haven't seen yet. And then Intergovernmental Relations section of the Treasury has sponsored a process within the Treasury to identify what a capability development program for the Treasury would look like. Something that's within its own mandate, clearly within its own mandate to actually do. And so far, interviews with 10 units across the National Treasury that are responsible for different components of local government and capacity building, which are located mainly within intergovernmental relations, but also in the Office of Accountant General, and also across the provincial treasuries, the provincial COGTAs, Development Bank of South Africa, and MISA, DCOG itself, and the municipalities. These have all been held, and a workshop has been held within the Treasury to collectively agree a way forward with the National Treasury units based on the outcomes of those interviews to design a program. And so without letting the cat out of the bag, because obviously these are processes that are still unfolding, the highlights of what the emerging capability development program from a National Treasury's perspective would include a change management approach to tackling essentially what are systems within the system, which I think is probably not highlighted strongly enough in the report itself, but has become increasingly apparent as one tries to get down to the nitty-gritty of how to reorient and to effect this radical change that the report is calling for. So it cannot just be a technically driven program. And essentially the Treasury is saying its work needs to start at home. And it needs to also build on the existing work that it has got, but also seek improvements in capacity building that it's doing right now, but in parallel with new initiatives in the capability development space. And so far, we're looking at draft outcomes that talk about effective, accountable leadership for coordination and collective action, as well as effective and long-term organizational-wide approach for local government capability development, because there isn't one at the moment. And then also looking at how to improve the learning environment. Of course, yes, plenty gaps. We still are somewhat in the dark about COGTA's own upcoming integrated strategy for the National Capacity Building Framework. And right now, GTAC is consolidating all of these inputs so far into this capability development program for National Treasury for discussion, hopefully at the end of this month. So Renette, I think let's just hand over to you to drive us with the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Lee. I think this is it holds the possibilities, I think I should say. I think let me open it up for question, but I just want to questions, please, from the people that are attending. I want to say that I understand so well. There was a little throwaway sentence about about how local government is dismayed, I would say, plural, at being seen as incompetent. And I agree with that. I think that we have been using and reporting and using categories and words around government that has created an impression that everybody is corrupt and incompetent. And I think, you know, your way of talking about capabilities, it points to the institutional and structural constraints around getting real reforms off the ground and why it is so difficult to get those reforms off the ground. I want to sort of keep on pushing. I'm glad you ended at slide 14 and not slide 13, because at that point still I was saying, now what does it look like? How do I know that we've got a capability-driven reform versus a reform that is just the old-fashioned, as you would probably say, capacity building type of work that we are doing? How will I know it when I see it happening? How do I recognize that this is now a different way of reforming? And have you, okay, let me ask that question first, and please open up the floor. Please put up your hand. You know how the system works on the virtual seminars. Thank you very much, I should also say, before I just jump in intellectually, but thank you very much. This is very interesting and challenging to think about. Lee or Tracy, would you like to answer that first question from my side?
I suppose I should be answering it because I'm the one that's working with the National Treasury departments. And I think this is exactly what we are trying to battle with right now. What is it that would look reformed from the Treasury perspective? What is its contribution to improving that entire local government capacity building system? So I think that it's been the report itself is a kind of a wake-up call for Treasury to introspect around how it can do things differently in the local government space. And that's exactly where we are right now, is to see what are the specific interventions that can be made that improves Treasury's contribution. How does it have to organize itself differently? So I don't want to say more, because obviously this is a process that it's an intense process, and it involves all of those 10 units across the Treasury talking to each other around how exactly to do that and agreeing on that. And of course, there are as many different perspectives of what needs to be done as there are units.
You see, I'm going to just push back a little bit with your refusal to answer me. and then of course I will bring Ngaka in. I just want to say to you that you talk about sort of an incremental approach, and then the type of things that you on your slide 13, and then the type of incremental capability development issues that you talk about is the expenditure reporting and the grant streamlining that is within the ambit of a treasury space, under the control of a treasury. Now, we all understand streamlining grants, that makes a lot of sense. I think everybody can imagine what that looks like. But when you talk about incremental improvements around expenditure reporting, I mean, what are we saying to each other here? What are we saying, which I actually believe half the time, is that a lot of the reporting structure in government and this extensive burden that whatever sphere is feeling, local or national, provincial, goes nowhere. People report and it goes up into the air and nobody really looks at it. Are you saying there's a problem there? But what do you mean with that? I want to practically understand and start to imagine what it could be different in the sites, of course, make a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, that's good, and it's an excellent question, and I know Tracy's going to pitch in here. But in the work that we've been doing now with the treasury units, we can see that there are actually other burning issues as well. And maybe the expenditure reporting, which was intended to be around capacity building expenditure reporting, so that we could get a clear picture of where the money is, how it's being spent, and so on. That seemed to be the burning issue at the time that the report was written. Now there's maybe other things that are also perhaps on the forefront. But Tracy, I think here is your opportunity to come in.
I mean, I think one of the things with reporting and the streamlining and improving the reporting was not just around the expenditure reporting, but also the sort of all that other reporting that's done on municipal health. And one of the people we interviewed put it very nicely, said, you know, you ask me to send you information about myself and I tell you I've got a headache. Okay. And then you come to me in a month's time and you say, how are you doing? You say, well, I've still got a headache. And you go, oh, well, that's fine. That's good. Off you go. And then you've still got your headache. So the one thing is, you know, what are people report? There is so much reporting, you know, on indicators in municipalities. And if you go and look at a place, let's say, take a place that's got real problems. I mean, Northwest, and they, you know, the provincial cocters there would be honest that they've got problems in their province. Now you've got a team of kind of 2 or 3 people that are responsible for working through literally hundreds of indicators from 23 different municipalities every month. Nobody can figure out what is going on. So we really need to streamline and say, actually, these are the 6 things that we need to know about a municipality on a consistent basis. The more reporting we have, the less we know about what's going on. The other issue was around trying to change the expenditure reporting in 2 respects. The first thing is to have a more standardized way of reporting expenditure on these programs, because sometimes you'll see some programs under capacity development, it's about, I don't know, anti-drugs training or something, or GBV or whatever. So it's kind of become a catch-all phrase, and particularly municipalities themselves spend a lot of money on this, but they don't report it. It's not a discrete category of reporting. And even when we tried to go on to MSCOA and have a look, there was all sorts of arbitrary nonsense that had been captured under the capacity building. So it's very difficult for us to understand who's doing what. It's very difficult to go into a municipality and say, you've spent so much money on training like 20 people, because you don't have that information. And then the other thing was to try and consolidate reporting by kind of destination. So at the moment, there's no way of knowing how much money is being spent by everybody in a particular municipality, but that's actually quite an easy thing to do. So just those improvements are what we're looking at there.
Okay. Sounds very, very sensible. Just because I want to drop this in and then I'll go to you, Ngaka, is that I'm trying to track the type of reporting burden for national and provincial, and I'm sitting at 199 reports on an annual basis. And each report has got, like, you know, pages and pages of stuff in it. It is absolute madness. We are totally over-reporting and underperforming. But let me stop talking myself. Ngaka, would you like to ask your question? Machete?
Yes, thanks, Joe. Thanks so much. No, thanks for the excellent presentation from Tracy and Lee. I think the biggest challenge that maybe I have is having worked with the local government, with the municipalities, and also working to support them. I think the challenge is that we often conclude that as national government, we are the experts and we know more than what local government does. I'm not sure of your engagement if maybe you try to find out from the local government space to say, what do you think the national government must do to support you? Because often at time we conclude, I think I agree with you when you say, no, the challenge is the capacity, the challenge is the mismanagement, is the corruption and all that. But then where do we get that from? Do we conclude because we've been in that space? Do we understand that maybe these guys are going under a lot of pressure? How do we then build our program to be able to be supportive instead of us going there to collect reports and come back and say, no, okay, this one is performing very well, don't give him money, or give this one money because this one has done this and this and this. So the biggest challenge for us, I think, is that we think we are the experts. We think we know all without even maybe giving an ear to the local government space and ask them to say, what do you think you can streamline all these programs to be able to become effective and efficient for you? So I think somewhere we also need to do some introspection, because you go to your local government meetings, you find there's maybe 60% of the national government departments coming down, versus 40% where we all want the information from the very same local municipality. But then we don't provide tangible support to them, except demanding the report from them and also maybe penalizing them for poor reporting. So I think we also need to look into ourselves first. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, you want to comment on that, Tracy, Lee?
Yeah, I think that is a really, really good point, and that came up, in municipalities that we spoke to, including municipalities that get clean audits and are clearly very well run municipalities. They say there really is the sentiment, especially in national, that we're all a bunch of kind of idiots, and we don't know anything about anything. So that was the one thing, as people said, we need to have these programs kind of designed in cooperation with us. You don't just arrive and say, here's something to improve your municipality when you've spent no time at all actually understanding what is really going on the ground. And I think that's the frustration for municipalities as well, because they see a problem in its whole part, but they've got line departments coming with their little part of the solution and insisting that it gets done because they've got to do it for their own outputs and not doing that. And then I think that the general sentiment as well is that there's an underappreciation of many of the real structural issues in local municipalities. And that is particularly around resource mobilization and the ability of poor households to actually pay their accounts, and thereby, create the kind of money that's needed for critical things like infrastructure maintenance. So, it's clear that there's a different kind of dialogue that is required among the parties.
Yes, Lee, you want to come in as well? Okay, no. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think we recognise the fact that there's a over-reporting burden and a over dismissive burden that the local government people have to carry.
Sorry, Renette, if I can just jump in there. Sorry, Naka also asked, the other part of his question is what do they see? Well, the compliance and regulatory burden is also seen as a huge drain on municipal resources and something that takes money away from things that are needed in much other way for no real benefit. Thanks.
Yeah. And then we can talk about processes around auditing as well. Can I, Lindy Ndlela, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Ronette. Thank you, Lee, and thanks, Tracy, for this really, really good work that you've done. And I think you've just only scratched the surface in terms of what's going on. I mean, it's very clear from the conversation that's coming up that the issues are just many, 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 so you'd find that people are just going to work every day to just compile these reports that go and sit and gather dust somewhere. There's been a suggestion that was made in jest a long time ago that national government officials, especially those in the center of government, should actually just spend a month or two every year working in a municipality and just looking and watching what actually goes on in a municipal space before being branded as incompetent or not knowing what they do. And I like the fact that you're bringing up the joined up of local government, because that's partly where the problem is, and it creates a problem about where then do you start with a capability development approach, or even capacity building, whatever it is that you want to call it, because in actual fact, in the municipal space is where everything that government does in its silo approach happens in one space, in one institution, and how those institutions then have to be configured to be able to respond and be able to do what they need to do is very, very important. I mean, there's been ideas and some what do you call it? Tried methods. I know Gauteng has tried a method around war rooms. You know, they have this ward based assessments to look at a ward, and it's very special in nature. I don't know if they still do it, but to look at the distressed wards and then say, what do these wards need? And invariably they would need a lot of cooperation of services that are, in terms of the powers and functions, are national and provincial in nature. So you would need to have that concert kind of playing out in that particular ward or in that particular municipality. And part of the problems that we've seen, even with integrated development planning, I mean, the idea is very, very simple, but the fact of the matter is, how big is national and provincial government to be able to respond to all the needs in municipalities? So I like the approach that you guys are putting up in terms of innovation labs, in terms of pilots of this. The concern, however, is that you haven't had sight of what COCTA is developing, and for us to have a comprehensive capacity or capability development approach when it comes to local government. It's very, very important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that, or shall I? You want to comment? I think those were not necessarily meant for questions, but just observations as well. Johnson.
Thank you, Ronette. Good afternoon, colleagues. I just want to find out, I had difficulties connecting. If you responded to this, you will excuse me. But I just wanted to find out if you have really checked into the impact that the high turnover of senior management in municipality has in terms of institutional memory and how municipalities are run. Because most of the time you go into a municipality, do capacity building, train these officials, and a year or two later, they leave the institution because some of them are on contract, and when there's elections, when new councillors come in, the old senior managers are removed. So have you really checked what impact does that have, both in terms of institutional memory and the amount of money spent on officials that are let go by municipalities simply because either when council comes, the mayor wants their own MM, they want their own CFO and all those. Have you really checked what is the impact and how much is costing government in terms of the spend that we do in terms of capacitating those particular officials, but at the end of the day, they leave the institution? Thanks.
Yeah, Johnson, that's a very important issue. We did discuss it in the report. We didn't work out exactly how much money it is, but what it does is that the very high staff turnover, and once again, you find a situation where the lower functioning the municipality, the more likely it is it's got a very high staff turnover. And so when most of your program is focused on training individuals, this is actually a very high risk and very expensive way of trying to effect change. People will say every single time you've got a course for the CFOs, a different person from this municipality comes. And then, as you quite accurately said, this money is completely wasted because they don't stay in the municipalities. There tends to be a much lower staff turnover in kind of lower level officials, a more basic administration officials. But a lot of the training is not necessarily focused on those people. It's focused on more senior officials. So yes, it has a very, very detrimental effect, and it means that a lot of the money that's being spent in the current system is essentially wasted because people are just leaving. Sorry, someone put something there in the chat about professionals that are resident in the municipalities. That was something that also came up. Much to the frustration, especially of a lot of more smaller rural municipalities who really struggle to get engineering expertise. So they do have retired professionals in their municipality who would be happy to work for the municipality on a really not very expensive basis in that. But there's a prohibition on employing people over the age of 65 in the public service. So the one municipality said they'd found some old retired engineer that would come and help them with their water, working for them sort of as an employee, and they were told that they had to terminate his employment because he's over 65. And so I mean, this is just the way in which the system scores these endless own goals.
Yeah, no, it's really. I mean, I don't see any more hands coming up, but I think what we are really hearing here today, and very well, is that. And it worries me, and I'm gonna ask my question, but I just want to make the observation is that it's very easy to write policy and regulations and reporting frameworks and practice this and practice that notes in Pretoria on the hills, as I say. But it's very, very difficult to actually be at the coalface and to really implement. And it is as if though in a different context, I keep on wanting to say, can't we hear what it's like to really run a school, a hospital, a police station? What are all these rules that we've made up? How does it impact? And I think in a way, that's what you guys are trying to advocate here for, is let's hear what it's like. Let's understand the local conditions and the local problems. However, isn't there also something to be said for having slightly sort of simplified, uniform, like we talk about 5-6 indicators per municipality. Can't one just get that? Can't one just work it out and say, in future, here are the 5-6 indicators? So you get some standardized packages that apply to a local level. I know I'm slightly contradicting myself, but maybe that's my mind. It's not clear yet. Help me out here.
Renette, I think that would be great. I mean, if there was much more streamlined reporting and consolidated reporting focusing on the basics. And I think that if there was one intervention that would make a difference, it would do that. It would perversely, it would provide more information about what's going on in a municipality than the current thing. It would take a lot of the workload off municipalities, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, for that to happen, that requires all national departments to sit down and decide whose indicators will be reported on. So that's also a challenge. I mean, I really do like the idea of this experiential learning, that everybody who's involved in regulating local government should go and spend, 2 weeks in a local municipality, not as the visitor, as the whatever, but take a job there. Go and sit in the finance department, go and sit in the infrastructure management department, go there and see what it's really like from the reality of trying to run a municipality or a school or a whatever.
Yeah, there's also something wrong even with our university training. I want to sort of start to point out is that we emphasize the policy development and the sexy thinking and the hard intellectual work around that, but there's no recognition of the realities of management, I think, outside of the business schools, I should say, but of government management. I think there's something to be said about keeping at our academic contacts and to keep on reminding them that we need people that can run government, just sit and think in Pretoria on the hills, but actually run government. And perhaps also there's something wrong with our recruitment strategies. Why are we recruiting people that's never had the experience? What is the big Indians public service experience where you've got to work in the provinces before you can go to the national? I mean, there's something to be said about that, about real experience, about really understanding it. I'm going to give Hendrik and Ngaka again another chance. Lee, do you want to come in because you're on mute, by the way?
I shouldn't be on mute anymore, but so I can only talk from my experience as a practitioner in this space, from my own experience as working in local government and then trying to work on making this report mean something for Treasury. And so what I'm always struck by is how enormous this challenge is. And I've had these discussions with Tracy as well, is it's also quite tempting when you're sitting inside a national body to go like, oh, those are the municipalities, all 200 plus of them. They're all the same. They aren't. Everyone is unique. So how on earth does a National Treasury then develop capacity and capability then to come up with things that are differentiated and unique to that municipality it's a hell of a challenge. And then the other thing that I've also been struck by during this exercise is that there's two things. One is that these are all systems within systems within systems within systems. And at which point do you have to intervene in order to make the best change? So is that sectorally across maybe 3 or 4 municipalities in that area around just water service delivery? Or is it about looking at a different kind of way of appointing municipal managers? So if you have a churn rate in municipality X, it doesn't unbalance the whole municipality or the whole municipal system. And then the other thing that I've been struck by as well, the second thing is that when you talk about capacity building for local government, people often land up talking about local government. So the capacity building system is different to what is happening in the local government challenger space. They're not unrelated and they overlap and they are interrelated, but they're not necessarily the same thing. And so some of the challenges that we see even organizationally within the Treasury have got to do with kind of unresolved issues around how it wants to engage with local government on different things in different capacities according to different mandates. So you can see, or just even in Treasury, it's very hard to have one consolidated approach to local government, and then of course a capacity building system, a capability development system that follows in that line of logic.
Interesting. I hear you, and I think it's a nice way of thinking about it in a sophisticated way. Hendrik Labuskaghni and then Ngaka Machete. Hendrik?
Good afternoon. Can I just confirm that you can hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Name is Henry Labuskaghni, City of Tshwane. I work within the economic development space in economic intelligence. So, and this is kind of something that we found to be kind of universal in the problem from when something gets passed down from province or from national, the actual workability of that policy or piece of legislation is not actually practically applicable within the local space, within the systems designed to actually manage it, which makes implementation nigh impossible. Or the alternative to that is even in legislation. So if we talk about the MFMA, you have Regulation 36 and Regulation 32, which allow for the appointment of sole providers or appointment through another organ of state. And I use this specifically in the space of, let's say, data. I work a lot with data and obviously very detailed subnational data, right? So in the space of subnational data, you do not have a myriad of economic data suppliers. You literally have 2 in the country, and more specifically, one that meets the needs of what we needed to do. And then you work with people from supply chain, applying legislation of law, and they do not understand how it works. So you end up with gaps of 2 to 3 years fighting to try and just appoint somebody. And then you need to start getting creative. And we're not the only local government that has this problem. I've spoken to many people, even in province, that when you cannot even appoint for the tools of trade that you need to do your job, right, then you spend 90% of your job sourcing the information and 10% doing of what you actually need to do. So there has to be a kind of, we're sitting with a top-down approach. People at the top think this will be awesome for our country, and like, cool, we draft something. And very often there's a very small myriad of space where we can actually provide input in legislation, and we do provide this input, and then often it's overlooked because it's local government. Local government is where the action happens, or supposedly should happen. And there's a lot of inability or inaction at local government level as a result of that missing link. And that is a serious problem. And until that is changed, we're going to sit in the same place, having the same discussion 10 years from now.
Oh, Hendrik, I can only say I so agree with you.
Oh.
The very things that we need to do, the system of government prevents us from doing it. I so understand what you're saying, but let me hear the local government expertise.
I mean, Hendrik, I absolutely agree with you. And it's not just data. I mean, if you're in Groblershoop There's one hardware store within 100 kilometers of the town. You can't buy a wheelbarrow without being, in violation of supply chain management. And it comes down to the same thing that people say to us. They said all this legislation is made kind of for us, but without us, without people actually understanding what it means on the ground. And over-regulation. And this is an interesting thing, because some people in Treasury said to us, well, we know local government is over-regulated, but it's necessary because they are new organizations and you have to over-regulate them. Well, the opposite point of view is that when you over-regulate sort of a newish, youngish, relatively immature organization, you break it. This theory of premature load bearing, that there's only so much pressure that the organization can take. And the way to fix it is not with more regulation, it's with less regulation. But I agree with you. And I think that, I think a lot of, not all of them, but a lot of these issues would be addressed by people actually having to go into a municipality and say, oh, okay, so that's how it works, in reality, as opposed to the theory.
Yeah. And it's as if, though, very few people, and I think that's what makes your body of work so interesting, very few people are actually interested in this. The whole training, the whole gearing of the thinking of the researchers at university is not to look at this. It's to look at the sexy policy issues and to write a piece of legislation. Let me give Ngaka a second bite, a quick one, and then Non-Tutuzelo, and then I think we're going to close it. People can go. We've set till 3 o'clock, but I see people are staying here, fascinated by the discussion. But let's hear you. Ngaka?
Thanks, Chair, and apologies for maybe popping up again. But I think it's a very interesting discussion that maybe we have to provide some input into it. So I heard Lee and Tracy saying that they need to finalize this product or this assignment by May. I'm not sure if maybe I think they will respond to that, because I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. I'm happy that normally I think we are led by the politicians. One politician comes in and then they come with a flagship program, back to basics. We jump, we run after the politician, we develop something very quickly that does not make even sense to us as the officials. Another politician comes in and then says, no, this is my flagship program. Then we run. Now there's DDM, we run. Everything that comes with the politician or the minister, we run after it. But then I think it's about time, and I'm very happy that GTAC have started this. It's about the time that as officials, we sit down. We have seen all these programs. We have seen all these intervention programs. We have seen all these flagship programs that maybe different politicians came with. But then all of them, or almost all of them, they are sort of maybe the change of names and duplication of efforts that have already been done, but then they don't yield the result that we want to see on the ground. So if we sit down as officials or as whatever we call ourselves, but then we look back into saying how many local government intervention programs have been since 1994 or since 2000, whatever time frame that we can put for ourselves. Why did they fail? What were the challenges? What can we learn from them? So we package them in terms of, okay, 1 or 2 were successes, 1 or 3 were failures, 1 or 4 they were cut off because of the elections and all that. But then we come back to say, what can we learn from this thing? Then from there we write something that maybe we can be able to duplicate into other municipalities and say, this have worked in most of the parts of the country. We can test and then maybe add on it and see how can we utilize it moving forward. So I think there's a lot of work that has been done, but I think maybe as part of your research, go back and look back into all this intervention pilot programs that there's been a lot of money that have been poured into the local government space, but then there've been 0 results that came out of it. So if we learn from all those intervention programs and pilot programs and other administrative or expert programs that have been done by the officials, versus those that have been done by the politicians, that can also be able to inform your DDM processes moving forward and other programs that they make. We can also advise the politicians, okay, no, this one cannot work because we have done this work before. So I think as officials in this manner, I'm very happy that GTAC is taking that lead, but then we need to really involve other sector departments to say and package this support program as one to say. I remember COCTA had this single window window of entry into local government. I think that was during their Back to Basics program, to say everybody must come to COCTA so that maybe COCTA can then go to the municipalities on their behalf. Is that possible? Can we design something that says maybe we change the mandate of COCTA to say let there be a data center or a unit that focuses on the reporting? Can we go to SALGA and say, okay, this is your mandate? What can we do to really take off the pressure from the local government space of reporting and double reporting and doing all that? So I think we can only learn as we move, but then we need to learn from where we're coming from moving forward. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. Comments from your side, Tracy and Lee, or general agreement?
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe, yeah.
Sorry, if I was the queen of the universe, yes. I mean, I'd just say everybody must report on this, but that is not the reality. But having said that, I mean, Treasury does have a lot of authority in terms of what is reported on through the specification of reporting in the MFMA. And I think it's a question of, you know, if there's one thing that where the DDM model could add value, it would be to sit down with all the partner organizations and say, let's streamline reporting. I mean, that's one area where it's quite clear that lack of coordination is damaging local government, and that shouldn't be a too difficult thing to change. So if there's one thing that the DDMs could try, it's have a look at reporting.
Yeah, and just to sort of also say thanks to that last set of comments, is to say, yes, the Treasury is going to have a look at how it's organizing itself in this local government capacity building system. And the first step is to make this report as widely public as possible so that all the organizations and departments can see what is their role in trying to improve this particular system. And so I can definitely say there's a certain amount of frustration within National Treasury because it is not the queen of the universe. Contrary to popular opinion.
Always would like to be.
So the program that it will then embark on will be something that it is then able to do through its financial and fiscal mandate. It's going to be hardcore and gritty and probably somewhat internally focused on trying to improve its role in that whole local government capacity building, capability development space. And you might not even see it outside. Certainly not initially. So these kinds of programs, these change programs take time. It took us a long time to get here. This is a huge system. Nobody knew how big it was. It's grown organically since the 1990s. And look, this is what we have now.
It is massive, 9.1 billion. Ntutuzelo, non-Tutuzelo, I saw your hand. Do you want to come in?
Chair, no, thank you so much. No, it's down here. Thanks a lot.
Okay, well then I think we've come to the conclusion of the discussion this afternoon. I think we need to, there's somebody called Michael whose hand went up and down. I'm going to call it a day. Thank you very much for joining us, Michael. No. Thank you very much for joining us all today. This is the type of discussion we want to have on a Friday. It is just a little bit of extra stimulation before the weekend starts. Get your brain working and flowing again. Please join us. Everybody is welcome. It's an in-house Treasury, a GTAC exercise that we are going to have. We're calling it the Tunamina moment. It's a Fundanati moment. What am I saying? Fundanati moment. And it's about us just upgrading our skills on the IT systems. Today, we're going to look at Teams, how to store documents, how to use the whiteboard, how to use the planner in the 365 space. Look at how do you organize live events in Teams, etc., etc. Please join us. But thank you very much to Lee and to Tracy. This has been lovely. You've really got me now wanting to go and read that report in depth and detail. I look forward to more new insights from you guys. This is certainly the beginning of a project or a process, it sounds to me like. And let's respect and give the type of insight that practitioners have a space to develop and shape our minds going forward. Thank you very much to your hard work, and thank you for today. There's a link that you can click on and join us in the Fundanati moment. Thank you, Lee and Tracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.